This weekend is a really interesting and pivotal weekend. We've got big regulation changes and tweaks. What's new? How does it affect the racing? I've got a breakdown of like kind of everything. I may monologue a little bit. We can go point for point. Qualifying, I want to kind of start there. In an effort to make qualifying more flat out, there have been some changes to the battery recharge. They dropped it down from 8 megajoules to 7 megajoules. This is supposed to encourage less recharging during these push laps, more pushing the car to the limits, or at least the feel of that. Max output is 4 megajoules at 1 point, or like one dump, I guess. And instead of drivers having to fully recharge twice per lap, they'll have to recharge less. How do you feel about the qualifying spectacle being tweaked? Your thoughts on like what they're doing?
Yeah, for me, the fact that it's such a marginal decrease, I'm curious how much it'll really equivalate on track. I think the Merc is still going to dominate. I think at most we'll see minor shifts middle of the pack. If I had to like look into like my crystal ball, I don't think it's going to be anything massive. Not to jump ahead into the points, I think the real changes are probably going to be on what they altered for like starting procedure and stuff like that. I think quali at most, they're just sort of allowing or hoping that there will be less cars that are like desperately off the pace while another car is hot lapping. That'll lead to some of the scary stuff we saw, which, I mean, it wasn't under quali, it was under race conditions when Behrman went off, but I think they're just hoping they can mitigate that with less people recharging at like microscopic pace as they trickle around Japan. Yeah, I don't think quali will change that much, because they changed something about super clipping too, but I can't remember what they did.
So it's if only like 2 to 4 seconds per lap are estimated to be spent recharging the batteries. So this is going to be an effort to like just keep them pushing instead of managing. So instead of like lifting into the high speed corners, you're going to see hopefully drivers pushing more. At least that's what they're looking for. But the less power recovered means they're going to be using less on a lap, which means the laps are inherently going to still be slower. But they're going to, I guess the idea is that they'll look and feel visually more like they're pushing the cars more consistently rather than the super clipping like you were just mentioning, right? Going down like a main straight, throttling it in sevens just to keep spinning the turbo and keep recharging the battery. But I think they did do a change. Like the peak super clipping power has also been increased to 350 kilowatts.
Yeah, that was
250 kilowatts. So this is supposed to be more energy that can be recovered all at one time versus in the spurts that we were seeing through across like Australia. Hopefully leading to less super clipping. But that also means that in the heavier braking zones, like going down to T1 in Miami, for instance, or like what's the corner on that? I think it's like turn 14 or 15 or something like that.
Yeah.
They're going to be braking a lot harder and a little bit earlier to try to decelerate and recharge that battery there. They've also changed this too from 8 events up to 12. So basically they're putting a lot of little like band-aids and patchworks into the regulation, at least when it comes, this is just quali, by the way, to try to stave off that super clipping. Honestly, I'm kind of curious your impression so far of like qualifying within these regulations. How have you felt across the first 3 weekends, how it's been?
I think there was a lot of, at least the sentiment in we talked about this privately. I think the sentiment in the sport was a lot of like immediate doomer sort of mentality of like, look at Mercedes, they're so untouchable. But I think from what I saw, everyone looked about where I figured they would be post new regulation. Like Merc nailed it. They're quick. Quali looked fun. There were a lot of cars that were way more rear active than I expected them to be. You'd see like Leclerc spinning his rear out a lot. I think we saw that in China pretty much every time he came around the final.
I saw a lot of that in Australia too.
Yeah. Which I think led me to believe the cars were at least more interesting to drive, probably more dangerous, which is probably leading to this. It's like they're having this like huge effort from each driver to like consciously make a choice as to whether they're going to put all their eggs into the basket of the start of the lap or the end of the lap, which I didn't necessarily hate. I liked that there was strategy to it. It's like you were playing chess with quali, and I think everyone just sort of got angry because Merc didn't really have to. They had such a dominant car that they could do whatever they wanted to throughout the lap, and they were still probably going to come out ahead. But like, we saw Ferrari start to show up and put in some exceptional times. I'm curious if any of this will amount to any team having like an increased chance of outperforming the rocket ship that is the Mercedes. I don't know, but
or trying to like bridge that gap closer on like a single lap. Anyway, well, because
maybe the McLaren.
I know they made one tweak as more of a like, okay, we've noticed this. We're closing the book on it with the end of the lap. The battery dump that they had exploited, them and Red Bull, which it said a lot about Red Bull that they were using the same trick as Mercedes and still qualifying and like
exactly.
But they closed the book on a advantage that it was estimated to give them like hundredths of a second. I don't know that the rest of the field were going to catch up to them based on just that. And even the regulation tweaks here in qualifying, I think everybody's going to feel these very similarly. If anything, they made this such a blanket thing that everybody's going to kind of take the same level of step back. I don't know that like one team is going to have built their car around this particular instance potentially being like, okay, they're going to install this, we're going to build around it. I don't know how you would do that.
The only team that I could ever consider maybe would be if Newey pulled that master stroke I joked about, and he's like designed his car in a way that it is like a shit box until the regulations step back into this window that he had planned they would end up in, and that's why it's like this smaller wheelbase and like this teenier like box form he's ended up in, and like then it becomes a rocket ship. But I think that's cope. And I think we're all just dreaming that the AM will like speed up at some point. So maybe we show up to quali and suddenly the Aston Martin is fast as hell and still giving them like nerve damage.
Or we find out that some of these cars are like legit submarines that can like weave through water and like wet conditions really, really well. But when the sun comes out, they're just nuked. I
do think there is a chance that the Williams boat might sail on water. Okay, like it looks horrible.
It's so heavy.
On dry land.
So heavy.
That's what I mean. It's heavy. So like on a damp track, not even joking, I think it would have more chance of being like consistent simply because heavier car, you're gonna have less slippage in the corners. You're getting down on the power quicker. You might have a chance to at least get like a P10, something for poor Albon, something for Carlos Sainz's cool helmet. But they're not going to race.
Keep that in mind with our guesses later.
Yeah, exactly. It's up there,
dude. He's tipping it. He's tipping it. They also did some race tweaks. So I'm gonna there's a lot of things they did, a lot of ways to explain it. This is the best way I understood it. But the boost function has basically been pulled back a little bit. Mm-hmm. So they pulled back on deployment, the way it was written, deployment from 350 kilowatts of power to 250 in certain portions of the track where overtaking is less likely. So looking back to Japan, you kind of mentioned it earlier, the Colapinto and Behrman incident. Basically, the max deployment is still going to exist in what were like the former DRS zones, but they're trying to make sure that drivers aren't putting themselves in like legit harm's way. I'm guessing you're probably a big fan of this one as well. I mean, overall, we don't want to see people getting hurt. I mean, Behrman walked away from it looking like he had snapped his leg in half or something.
Listen, part of me thinks it's still, and I don't want Argentinians to be mad at me. Part of me still thinks it's weird that Colapinto did that little swerve. I don't know how much we can put on deployment and how much we can put on like this strange little shimmy to the left that is really, in my mind, what threw Behrman to like reacting. Action. Yeah, and I think that's, but like still having cars that are just 50 kph off the speed of the oncoming car, having that be less of a problem is gonna be nice, regardless of how I feel about that one specific crash. So I think it's a good countermeasure. I still want to see how it plays out. I still think we're gonna have clipping and weird stuff, and it's just gonna be more shenanigans.
There's probably still gonna be some level of the offset. I think the way that they tailored this was, look, there's still going to be battery deployment and strategy, but they don't want it to be such a quick closing speed that cars are having to take effectively that evasive action. I do agree with you. I think that in that particular instance, that Colapinto, from the media perspective, has gotten off really light because he parked the car in the center of the road in a non-traditional passing area, which like Behrman's coming up on you 50 kph faster, and you're I'm just gonna put it right here, and force him to either choose my back end or the grass. And Behrman chose the grass. They also altered race starts, by the way. And I thought this was interesting because I hadn't heard about this ever happening in F1, and maybe you can let me know if this has ever been a thing. I know that there have been moments in the past where teams had basically timed or they had basically cheated their way into like the timing line or something. But race starts, in a nutshell, if the engine doesn't fire and you're a sitting duck off the line, the battery's supposed to overtake and boost you up to like 30 miles per hour. So you're not a sitting duck off the line.
Yeah.
Your impression?
I mean, it's just anti-stall, but now your anti-stall is like a gun start. It's like, oh, you messed this up big time, buddy. They've like turned, I forget what the term is in like supercars, but they've turned their whole like ignition push system into, we don't want you to get run into the back of, because that is probably one of the most heinous crashes you can have, is someone just like gunning into your rear into like an advantageous thing. Well, not advantageous, but I mean, it's definitely better than sitting there and losing your entire race, a la Piastri last year. Yeah.
I mean, we've seen the Red Bulls struggle with this. Max Verstappen has struggled with it, honestly, the most among like any driver on the grid this year. I think across Australia, China, and Japan, he's had 3 really rough starts out of like the 4 different like racing formats they've had. So if anything, Red Bull are the team they're going to gain the most from this. I know Mercedes obviously struggled off the line too. Like they're going to probably benefit a little bit from this just to get the car rolling. But 50 kph off the line sounds like a lot. It's 30 miles an hour in cars that go 220 in a straight line. So it's just getting that rolling start. I liked this change. I think that it's fair. You certainly like the moment between Colapinto and Lawson in Australia that almost ended in disaster, almost ended both their races off the line, if not for Colapinto's insane reaction time, by the way. Yeah, that could have been really scary. Yeah. And I felt like that was one of those things, watching it, that you were hoping wasn't going to continue to be a problem. Obviously, it continued to be a problem. So I think that's an overall positive. I think you and I agree on it. I think almost every F1 fan universally is going to agree on that one. They also changed some wet weather stuff, and this is more of just like a rundown. Intermediate tire temperatures for the warming blankets have been upped to help with the grip. During rain, the ERS or battery deployment is going to be reduced or completely neutralized for safety. So they're basically not going to have these cars firing as quickly, of course. They're already kind of challenging to control. Putting these things on ice rinks in the wet, basically, probably not a great idea. Lights have also been a little bit more simplified, apparently, to help the drivers recognize situations or cars ahead a little bit quicker. So with all that being said, all the tweaks and changes, unfortunately, the teams, again, aren't going to have too long to prepare, because Miami and Canada are both sprint weekends now back-to-back. And the FIA added 30 minutes in FP1 in Miami, but if it gets rained out, I don't know how much data and how much of a real assessment that teams are really going to gather from that 90 minutes. You spent time around teams a little bit on race weekends, even having that extra 30 minutes. If it gets rained out, how much does that like really change things in your eyes?
I see, from my experience, and I've always kind of had to reconcile this with like what I see, is you're kind of going in, even before FP1, I would say like 90% complete on your idea of like what the car is going to be. You've kind of mathed your setup optimally to how you understand the car. And typically, sort of like what you see with like an F1 manager game and stuff like that, is you're then just running around, and then whatever the driver is complaining about, you're doing marginal tweaks, but it's never that sensational of a change. Like there's never a moment where you're like, oh, we've really mucked this up. I mean, you can muck it up. Like you can muck it up pretty hard because computers are only so smart. But like you've never like had a revelatory moment and you go in and suddenly you're like shifting every like front sway bar and stuff like that. So I don't know. Even though like 90, honestly, I feel like you could skip most of it, and I think more of the impact comes to the driver than the teams. Like I think the teams know already how they're going to set the cars up for their drivers, for how they like it. I know that Max is going to have a rear active car. Like they know pretty much like how they're going to run Miami. I think if it's a new track or a track they haven't been to in a while, then that's where like the fun of it comes in. But since we were at Miami last year,
we're going to be there till 2041.
We're going to be there forever. It's never leaving. Hard Rock Cafe is here forever. Thank God. Who would want Laguna Seca? We want Miami forever.
Why would we want to go back to like Hockenheim or why would we want to do that? No, more Miami, baby. But like, I guess, how does like rain specifically impact a weekend for a team, would you say?
I mean, that one is the great question, because I think a lot of times, even though every team loves to talk, like you have your ABC, and then like your D plan is you typically always like types of rain. Your like D and E's are like always like, this is if it's like heavy torrential, this is if it's damp and all that. Even then, the problem with rain that they don't ever really talk about is like it also throws off like the barometric pressure of the air around you all the time. It changes the way air works. Like, I know it's going to sound stupid, but like air gets heavier with more water in it. Air is like harder to push through if it is humid, if it's dense. So like, even if it's not raining, you're typically accounting for like, this is a humid environment. This is a dry air environment. So like when it rains, you're like, oh, now on top of like, we set up hoping it was going to be a dry weekend. Now the whole car shifts into like, it's going to be harder to push air. Cars that are less aero forward and like more engine centric, or like can rely more on just pure mechanical power, are gonna be stronger, because it's like, oh, well, I have less trouble pushing through this now butter or like I'm cutting through this like butter because I'm just a giant. That's why I'm saying like the Williams that's heavy then is getting to like push itself down into the tarmac faster out of the corners. It's the great equalizer. You can't plan for like, you would have had to design your car for the rain, and like a lighter car like the Merc might have a tougher time. It might allow other teams to fight it depending on it, but we don't race in the rain. Like that, whenever there's enough rain for it to matter, there's too much plume coming out the back of every car the drivers can't see, and they're like, just park it. It's not, it's dangerous.
If it's not intermediate, like level, if basically by the time the rain gets bad enough for it to even be wet tire like conditions, unless you're Kevin Magnussen being really ambitious in Canada that one time before Haas just nuked the strategy, it's probably going to get red flagged anyway.
Yeah, it's kind of a bummer too that the wet tire has been relegated to like, they should just remove it. They just shouldn't have it on the lineup, because like you don't run it. Or be like, this is strictly for only qualifying scenarios or like safety laps, because it's the second you hit wet weather racing, they're like, red flag. Mm-hmm. That's terrifying. We're not putting them out there in that.
Yeah, makes sense. I was, just to circle back on like the regulation changes though, we talked about it a little bit earlier, and I just wanted to wrap up on these couple of questions. Tweaks being the key word with everything that's been happening. How much does this really change over the course of the season, the complexion? Like, does it, from a sporting perspective, do you think this is going to have a big impact on some teams? Or again, like my assessment is I think everybody kind of gets affected equally.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think middle of the pack, maybe some team who had a chance of being higher is now a little bit lower. Maybe there was some little quirk of their car that needed them to perform at like 8 megajoules or whatever, and now 7. But like for the front runners, I can't see this like suddenly making McLaren a fighter. I can't all the people who were like terrified that these start changes are gonna stop the Mario mushroom for Ferrari, I think they're just scared. And I think Merc,
that thing is incredible off the line. Yeah, it's made every weekend a lot of fun.
I think it's just gonna be it's still going to be incredible. I think we should already hand Merc their championship. I don't see a world where we catch up. I see a world where we go from like 5/10 to 2/10 behind them. We can at least see them at the end of the race, and that's That's the joy. You know, that's what F1 is. And then maybe next year we scare them. But yeah, they'd have to change a lot to scare Merc out of. Merc's nailed it. They made like the perfect car, and it's only gonna get better. They act like Merc is just gonna like sit back and be like, "We've done it. Don't
It's
touch
all
it.
over, ladies and gentlemen. This is our championship. George Russell, this is it.
George, Kimmy's got it. George keeps messing up, dude. He's been throwing himself into like
Jimmy's
six.
got it.
Yeah.
That is music to my ears, sir. You know it.
Gross. I don't need another child champion. I don't need another child champion.
Play it back, and I'm gonna be using it for the rest of the season.
Poor Leclerc, dude. Leclerc's what, 40 now? Still no shit.
I mean,
My baby.
that's a whole conversation on its own. We have a lot still to get through.
Yeah.